So last night I posted a poll on the community tab asking you guys what team you want to see me do next for the 2019-20 expectation videos, and by a pretty significant amount the Montreal Canadiens won, and they're also one that I wanted to do it on because they're a pretty interesting team. They have a lot of good young talent there, and they definitely can build off of last season where it was kind of an unexpected year for them. They were almost in the playoffs, and I definitely think next year they could take a step forward and potentially even squeak in as a wildcard team. Starting off like we do in all of these videos, taking a look and kind of recapping the year that the Montreal Canadiens just had. They finished the season with a 44-30-8 record, 4th in the Atlantic Division, and while that didn't get them into the playoffs, I still think it is a year that they can build off of, and definitely a year that they should be proud of. If they were in the Western Conference, they most definitely would have been a playoff team, so next year I definitely think this is going to be something they can look at and be like, we can do this again, and we can squeak into the playoffs, or maybe even get into one of the top 3 seeds in the Atlantic, which would be tough because it's a very strong division, but this Montreal team on paper especially, I really like the look of it. Their leading goal scorer last year was Brendan Gallagher with 33 goals, and their leading point scorer was Max Domi with 72 points, a breakout season for him, and Marc Bergevin and the Canadiens organization definitely have to be pretty pumped with how that trade has worked out so far for them. Their notable rookies from last year, obviously Jesperi Kotkaniemi, the 3rd overall pick in the draft, came in and was pretty strong for the Montreal Canadiens, and I definitely think he'll take an increased role next season and be a top 2 center for this team. And then I put Ryan Poehling, even though he only played 1 game, he had a hat trick, and he's going to come in next year in my opinion and play a full-time NHL role, probably in a bottom 6 position, but even if he does just play in the bottom 6, that still just increases the overall depth of the team, and definitely something Canadiens fans should be excited about. And one thing I want to touch on before I get into all the expectations and stuff heading into next season is them selecting Cole Caulfield 15th overall in the draft. What a steal that was, and I even saw some people on Twitter saying he's going to win the Calder next year, which he most definitely isn't, just because he is committed to play for the University of Wisconsin next year, I do believe, so he's probably going to play a year of college, and then next summer is where he's probably going to come into training camp vying for, a spot on the Montreal Canadiens roster. And I think that'd be good for him, 1 year in college, which I think he's definitely going to thrive, and play against some older guys. I think that'll really make him that much more ready to make the jump to the NHL. So I just wanted to touch on that, before I got into the video, because I don't really have him in any of the expectations for next season, and that's strictly because he's probably going to be playing college hockey, but he is going to be a big part of their future and definitely was a steal with the number 15th pick. The next topic I wanted to individually touch on before I get into all the predictions and expectations and stuff is, does Nick Suzuki play in the NHL for the Montreal Canadiens next season? And I definitely think there is a very good chance. Obviously he came over in the Max Pacioretty trade from the Vegas Golden Knights. He was a 1st round pick, 13th overall in 2017, and I think Canadiens fans should be super pumped about this kid because I think he can come in as soon as next season and really play a significant role for them and put up a good amount of points, especially if he plays in a significant role, which I think he could slot into nicely, playing with guys like maybe Thomas Tatar and Kotkaniemi, or maybe even like Brendan Gallagher and Domi and those guys. So I just think he's going to fill, into this lineup nicely. Last year in the Ontario Hockey League, played 59 games and had 94 points. So obviously he can put up the points. His younger brother was just drafted in this previous 1st round. So him and his brother, I definitely think have bright futures ahead of them. So if I had to guess, I think we will see some of Nick Suzuki in the NHL next season. I don't really think another year in the Ontario Hockey League would do much for him. I think he's accomplished really everything he can down there in terms of, progressing and putting up points. I think it is time for him either to play in the NHL or maybe play in the American Hockey League for Hamilton, but we're going to have to wait and see, but he definitely is going to be a big part of the future of this Canadiens team. So now getting into my player stats predictions for some of the Canadiens next season, and I say this at the start of all these, when I do these in the expectations videos, it's all hypothetical. They're probably not all going to play 82 games. It's kind of just their points per 82 games, and if they do stay healthy the full season, what I could see them doing in terms of putting up numbers. So leading the way, I think it'll be Max Domi again. I have him up around 75 points. I think he can still be a consistent 70-point scorer. A lot of people think he might drop off a little bit from his career year, but I think it is something that is sustainable, especially playing with talented guys. So I have him 30 goals, 45 assists for 75 points. Then I have Jonathan Drouin having a breakout year finally for 65 points. I think he's more than capable of doing so. He was a top 3 pick, and I definitely think it is about time that he realizes that potential. And, this Montreal Canadiens team could certainly use it. Thomas Tatar, I have him up around 58 points. He has been an amazing acquisition for this Canadiens team. He was also a part of the Max Pacioretty trade, and I definitely think they have to like what they've seen from him in his 1 year with the team. Then I have Brendan Gallagher, 30 goals once again for around 52 points. Then I have Jesperi Kotkaniemi having a pretty significant increase, scoring 20 goals and having 30 assists for 50 points, and I think a big reason why is because he will be in a more significant role. And then have Phillip Danault kind of dropping off a bit, but still having 45 points. Phillip Danault had a very underrated season this past year, but I don't really think he's best suited as a number 1 center, especially for a team that wants to go in and, make the playoffs. I think if a guy like Kotkaniemi or even Max Domi could take over the reins there, and then maybe move Philip Deneau as like your third line center, that would give you a really good 1-2-3 punch at the center position, and then maybe even have Ryan Poehling as your number 4 center. That would really give you a very solid, first line to fourth line center position. So Montreal, I definitely think their center spot is in good hands for the future, and that is something we could not say about them in previous years. It seemed like they could never just find the centers to really lead them in the right direction, but now I think they have a couple guys that really have the potential to do so, and I think they could have a really deadly offense next year. So now getting into some line combinations for the Canadiens heading into next season, and just overall looking at this, you could definitely interchange a lot of people, switch up the lines a little bit, but just overall how many guys on here that can produce offense and put up numbers, I think is a very, very welcoming sight for this Montreal team. First line, I have Thomas Tatar with Jesperi Kotkaniemi and Brendan Gallagher. Second line, I have Jonathan Drouin with Max Domi and Nick Suzuki, but I think that can be like kind of a 1A and 1B and really interchangeable to be what the first line is, because if you don't want to just throw Kotkaniemi in there and make him a number 1 center in just his second year, I think that second line of Domi, Drouin, and Suzuki could take over the first line. But just overall looking at how Kotkaniemi handled himself in the NHL last season, I definitely think he will do just fine as a number 1 center, especially playing with veteran wingers like Tatar and Gallagher. Then the third line, I have Paul Byron with Philip Deneau and Joel Armia, and I think that is a very, very solid third line. Philip Deneau moving back and, taking a lesser role, but I think he would be able to thrive in that position, and having him as your number 3 center, then I definitely think you're doing just fine. And then I have Joel Armia there. I liked him in Winnipeg. I think he can do, really good things in terms of a depth and kind of a role player position for Montreal. Then the fourth line, I have Arturi Lehkonen, Ryan Poehling, and Jordan Wheel, and I think Ryan Poehling could be interchangeable and maybe even go up, and maybe a guy like Paul Byron play the center position on the fourth line and play Poehling on the wing. Definitely, could really do a lot of things. And then you have Barber, Cousins, and Hudon as the scratch forwards, and they could come in, obviously, if there is an injury and stuff. But overall, just looking at this forward group, I definitely think Montreal Canadiens fans should be very excited, because I think a lot of these guys can do a lot of great things next season. Now taking a look at the Canadiens D-core heading into next year, the top pairing, I have Victor Mete with Shea Weber. I hope Shea Weber can stay healthy for the full season, because when he was on the ice, he was playing pretty fantastic this past season, and obviously that would make things a lot easier on this entire D-core, make things a lot easier on Carey Price, and it would make them, that much closer to being a playoff team if he could play and at least, 75 plus games. Then I have Ben Sherratt and Jeff Petrie. I think that's a very solid second pairing. I love the Ben Sherratt signing for them. I think Winnipeg is gonna, probably not think they're gonna miss him right now, but once the season gets underway, I think they're gonna realize how big of a piece he actually was to that team. And then the third pairing, I have Noah Juleson with Mike Riley, and I think that's a decent bottom pairing. Might lack a little bit of physicality, but then you have Kulak, who could come in, bring the physical presence if one of those guys and things aren't working out for them. So overall, I like the D-core. And then in net, you have Carey Price, who obviously, when healthy, went on his game as one of the top goaltenders on the planet. And then Kincaid as a backup, another really under the radar signing that I think could work out for them if Carey Price, does end up struggling with injury and isn't able to play in a lot of games. I think Keith Kincaid is more than capable to come in and, take a load off him, because remember, he led the New Jersey Devils to a playoff spot just 2 years ago, along with Taylor Hall in his MVP season. But Keith Kincaid was a very, very good and reliable starter for them that year, so I think he can be, a really, really under the radar signing that works out for them in the long run. But overall, I think they have a pretty solid D-core, and I think a lot of it just relies on the health of Shea Weber and Carey Price. So now finally getting into my final predictions and expectations for the team heading into next year. I'm going to stop predicting the record exactly, because I feel like that's a little bit too in-depth and more of just a guessing game. I'm just going to predict where I think they're going to finish in their division, and then if they are going to make the playoffs, I'm going to do that for the rest of these expectation videos heading into next season. So for the Montreal Canadiens, I have them finishing 4th in the Atlantic Division once again, but this time around, I think they're going to have a different fate, and I think they are going to get one of those wildcard spots and be a playoff team. They could potentially squeak in and maybe be a top 3 seed in the Atlantic, but like I said, that division is just so strong, especially with Florida now getting Sergei Bobrovsky, and obviously Boston, Tampa, and Toronto are probably going to be the powerhouses of that division. I think it'll be less likely for them to do that, but they have a good enough team, in my opinion, to make the playoffs and be, 4th in the Atlantic Division once again. Their leading goal scorer, I have Max Domi / Brendan Gallagher. I think they're both going to be 30 goal scorers. And then, as you guys saw in the points predictions, I have Max Domi as their leading guy with 75 points. But overall, I think Montreal Canadiens fans and their organization should just be optimistic heading into next season. Like I said, it should be pretty easy for them to build off of the strong year that they had last season. There is potential that maybe they could drop off and have a worse year, but just looking at the roster, and if everyone can stay healthy, which I think is a huge part of it, then this team more than likely should be a playoff team next year in the East. So that is going to wrap up today's video. I really hope you guys did enjoy, and make sure to let me know down in the comments comment section what team you guys want me to do next and all of your expectations and predictions for the Canadiens heading into next season. And with that being said, I hope you guys all enjoyed today's video. If you did, please make sure to drop a like on it and subscribe to the channel for daily NHL content, and I will see you guys all in the next video.